Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack. This is the Jack Slack podcast. And we're coming at you on Thursday, the 1st of April. Might fuck around and just lie a load today. That's everyone's favourite move on April 1st. But we've got a Bellator this weekend, and we got fuck all else. So I'm just going to sort of ramble, it might be like 15 minutes long, this podcast, but we'll go for it anyway. I mean, there's some interesting stuff going on. Derek Brunson came out. Well, firstly, John Jones has been declaring that he's talking to the UFC's lawyers. He says that anything 8 to 10 million is too cheap for the Ngannou fight, for a fight as big as the Ngannou fight. And while this is the thing, it's the right message coming through the mouth of an absolute dickhead. It's basically like whenever Tony Blair says something right in the news, you're just like, fuck off, Tony. But yes, right message, wrong messenger. John Jones is right. He should be making more money. And 8 to 10 million might seem like a lot for a fight, but the UFC makes a lot of money. And they make, the revenue split, the stuff that they've revealed on it is like a decade and a half old. And it was only 12% back then. They could well be, the split could be worse at this point, if we're honest. But then Brunson came out, Derek Brunson, and he was all like, why don't we all work together? And so the fighters crucified him. No, they haven't yet. But we're getting dangerously close to the fighters reaching sentience and realizing that they should be unionizing, or fucking players' association, whatever you want to call it, collective action to negotiate with your employer. And when Brunson said that, I was like, excellent, we're making good progress. I will bully the fighters into collective action within the next 5 years. If I bullied Michelle Waterson into having a good fight and bullied Michael Chandler into a title shot, I'm confident that I can get these guys to unionize just by replying "unionize, bitch" on any complaint any fighter ever has about getting offered a fight wrong, or being accused of being scared because he wanted more money. And I encourage any listener to the podcast, if you ever see a fighter complaining about their circumstances, unionize, bitch is the best response under all circumstances. Or organize, bitch, if you think that they're particularly like Red Scare inclinated. Like Sam Alvey, who didn't want the general standard of pay to go up because that would mean the stars get paid less, which it wouldn't. It never has. LeBron James and Kobe Bryant got paid as much as they ever did with a union. They wouldn't be paid more without a union. And then there's the idiots who are like, but union dues. And you're like, no one would ever form a union if you earned less money for doing it and paying dues than you would otherwise. Like, that's not how that works. And I think that the players' associations in the NFL and MLB, part of the dues goes towards the health insurance because they negotiate it collectively, don't they? But I'm not entirely clear on that. But the interesting revelation that they're bringing in, Endeavor wants to buy out the entirety of the UFC because they still, like Dana White has a portion of it, and several other actors have a portion of it, but came out today, and again, it's April 1st, so be careful, came out late last night that Endeavor wanted to buy the whole lot, and that Elon Musk's going to be on the board. Great shout. Guy with a fantastic history with unions and worker rights. guy who comes from wealth made in fucking ruby mines in Africa, and who's never been back to Africa since. God, that's going to get under the... There's Elon Musk simps in every audience at the moment, but... However, I was laughing about crypto last week and saying, well, if it ever becomes a currency, then it'll be... it's not an actual currency unless people accept it. And then I said, maybe if PayPal starts accepting it, and then PayPal did. So that was pretty cool. Another thing that I spoke into existence, apparently. But then Francis Ngannou made... $500,000 for his charity, which is awesome. Good on Francis Ngannou. Him and Boss Logic, they released NFTs, and NFTs are fucking the stupidest shit on earth, and they have the ridiculous carbon footprint for a GIF with a URL attached. But some idiot paid $500,000 for it, or multiple idiots did, which was great. I approve of Robin Hood style grifting. I'm a big fan of that. But I'm intrigued to see what will happen if Endeavor comes in, because there is talk at the moment that they are, or UFC brass, all the people collectively involved in owning it, are starting to see the writing on the wall regarding fighter pay as fighters. The more people get into main event position and realize, oh, this isn't actually that great. I thought I was going to be a sports star. I'm fighting in this league with not comparable turnover to the NFL or something, but comparable turnover to a couple of teams in the NFL, and it was barely worth me doing it. So intrigued to see what Endeavor does if they come in and they're like, hey, we're giving a host of benefits to the fighter, but notably less than they would have to if there was a collective action on the part of the fighters. I think that'll be interesting. Some other weird news this week, like Darren Till injured his collarbone, so he had a fight in a couple of weeks' time against Marvin Vettori, which was a fun enough fight, but now he's out. Darren Till in a weird spot because he barely wins, and then Israel Adesanya and all the top fighters are like, I'd love to fight Darren Till. He's got a very interesting style. What? He's not anywhere near contention. Shame for Marvin Vettori because he was making some progress forwards, but I presume they just bumped that back. I read collarbone injury. I didn't read broken collarbone, so a little bit more promising because broken collarbone can be a pretty big deal in combat sports, contact sports. Igor Zinoviev, very, very promising fighter. He had about 4 fights to his name, and in them he beat Mario Sperry. He drew with some other big name, and then he got a title shot at Frank Shamrock in the UFC because he'd done so much so quickly. And Frank Shamrock picked him up and dumped him on his back, and it broke Igor Zinoviev's collarbone. And then Zinoviev had to retire. It was a career-ending injury. And then he ended up working as Jeffrey Epstein's bodyguard, and the interviews with him are remarkable, and I recommend you check them out. And personal trainer, that's the other fun part of that story. The MMA world is never more than 2 steps removed from just absolute craziness. Other interesting news, Jose Aldo's calling for the Dominic Cruz fight, which I think we all have wanted for a while, but both those guys were sort of pretending, yeah, I'm ready for a title shot. I mean, Jose Aldo did in fact get himself a title shot, and then it fell through. But and then Dominic Cruz took it in his place. So yeah, they were in title contention. But for us who think that they're not champion material right now anymore, this has been one we've been wanting for a while. You've got a guy who uses a lot of movement to confuse his opponents, and then you've got a guy who is very economical in his movement and uses low kicks extremely well. Plus has amazing takedown defense, and Dom Cruz's backup is always his very strong wrestling. Honestly, that fight, you put it on a pay-per-view, that's half the reason for me buying it. But anyway, let's talk about the one event going on this weekend. Not one. It turns out that's next week, by the way. I said last episode that it was happening this week, but it isn't. The one event going on this weekend is Bellator 255, the return of Bellator. And if you're wondering, yes, I have gone all in on Coca. I have I think it's a £3 bet I put down, but it's all the favourites. So it's Patricio Pitbull, Tyrell Fortune, Usman Nurmagomedov, Alejandra Lara. I think that's all they'd let me have because my bookie's not carrying prelims and postlims on random Bellator cards, unfortunately. But I do like to focus on the main card because that tends to be where Bellator does a lot of its mismatches. And the piece by, I think it was Mike Bone. He did a piece at the end of last year, just being like, Bellator favourites went 18-0 to finish the year and 16-2 on main events throughout the year, or something like that. It was incredible. I don't expect it to all fall into place. And there are complications because there's things like Naaman Gracie and Jason Jackson. My bookie had them at even odds. And I lean towards Naaman Gracie. And Jason Jackson doesn't have a Wikipedia page. I've watched his last few fights, but he doesn't have a Wikipedia page. So I was like, that is probably the fairest way to do this one. So I included Gracie in the parlay. But Tyrell Fortune was a big favourite. Usman Nurmagomedov. People ask me for the lock of the week to come back, and the lock of the week is Usman Nurmagomedov because he's 11-0, he's a Nurmagomedov, and he's fighting a guy who's 7-4 and has won 2 fights since 2017. Now, there's a degree of in that because one of them was a split decision, one of them was a DQ. He's from the MMA lab, so he's not completely awful, but it's Bellator, and there's a reason this fight's been put together. The other one that was interesting was Kana Watanabe versus Alejandra Lara. Lara was the favourite, despite Watanabe being the undefeated fighter and having all the finishes. So I put the money on Lara because that's the rules. But I was looking down at Watanabe's record and I was like, oh, she seems alright. Maybe the betters know more than me, which is literally anything more than looking at these fighters' records. But I can see that one fucking things up for me. Main event, Patricio Pitbull versus Emmanuel Sanchez. Money's on Pitbull because obviously he's the champ. He's the guy who, despite being featherweight champion, is also lightweight champion because he knocked out Michael Chandler, and was making noise this week about how if Michael Chandler wins the UFC lightweight title, he is in fact the best lightweight on earth. Him, Pitbull, that is. But I was watching these guys' first fight this morning, and it was pretty interesting. I mean, people always ask me to write about Pitbull, and to an extent, they get angry when I'm like, he's kind of meat and potatoes, and he is kind of meat and potatoes. He has the interesting karate stance now from working with like Mano Santana. He's been working with Eric Albarracin, can never say his name, wrestling and stuff for years. But his striking is ones and twos, the odd three. He's got a cracking left hook. You know, when he does things that are weird, like against Sanchez, he switched stance to throw a back kick from southpaw, and it didn't really work. You know, he does weird things sometimes, but his biggest success is when he can time a good counter, or he can just use his great left hook to catch guys in exchanges. There's no real secret to having a great left hook. If you've got a great left hook, the more you can encourage the guy to throw with you, the more likely you are to knock him out. But the first Sanchez fight is pretty interesting because Sanchez, in the first round, he uses step-up round kicks to the head and body, and he keeps trying to time Pitbull ducking out along the cage, and he gets Pitbull standing up straight and then hits him with the right hand and stumbles him. But then for the rest of the fight, he's just sort of like kicking the arm and kicking the body, and he really isn't effective at using his hands, and he isn't effective at taking advantage of how he's been able to make Pitbull stand upright, whereas Pitbull's able to put himself back in with his power and his wrestling. And then I can't remember what happened in the fifth round, because the only time I've watched that was when it happened, because Bellator's player on their website is dog shit and it cut out. So the first 4 rounds of this one is what I'm judging this rematch on. Pitbull obviously coming off absolutely manhandling Pedro Carvalho, who was like twice the size of him. That was great, because Carvalho didn't have great defense, but did like to apply a ton of pressure, so he just walked himself onto the counterpunches. And before that, Pitbull beat Juan Archuleta, who's a powerful wrestler. And before that, it was Chandler at lightweight. So the reason that Pitbull's so fun is because he's often smaller than his opponent, and he still outpunches almost everyone he fights. I mean, Chandler is a massive hitter at lightweight, and Pitbull outpunched him too. I think for Sanchez, like, the high kicks are a great shout, but like hoping to break his arm or something, probably not a great idea. Use the high kicks, stand him up, hit him with 1-2s, land the low kicks because they were working really well in the first fight and he wasn't doing them enough. I think the thing is, like, Sanchez, you don't have to have better hands than Pitbull if you're using kicks and you're using like a rounded game to land them. You know, you just have to have more weapons, but you do have to have hands that you're confident in, and Sanchez really didn't seem to have that in the first fight. Yeah, Naaman Gracie versus Jason Jackson should be fun. Jackson coming off the win over Benson Henderson, but Benson Henderson, you know, anytime he goes up to welterweight, you're not getting the best of Benson Henderson, to be honest. But Jackson's on this interesting run of Kunimoto, Jordan Mean, and Benson Henderson. Before that, he lost a split decision to Ed Ruth. You know, good to go competitively with Ed Ruth. Actually, Ed Ruth sort of dropped off lately. But Naaman Gracie choked Ed Ruth in the fourth round, lost the decision to Rory McDonald in a fight with some fun grappling, and then he just most recently heel hooked John Fitch. So, yeah, quite interesting because he's got good submission wins over good wrestlers, which is always sort of the litmus test for a jiu-jitsu savant. You know, if you can't do it against guys who are good wrestlers, you don't really have, you know, you either had to learn to strike so well that you can beat them regardless, or your main skill is just bollocks now, you know. And then the Tyrell Fortune was booked to fight Matt Mitrione, and he was the favourite in that one, Tyrell Fortune, and that was one that I was really not sold on. I was thinking that was definitely going to screw up the all-in on Coca, because like Fortune, you know, he came in as like, he's another one of those Bellator purchases where they find a very accomplished wrestler and they're like, go pro with us, we'll have you smash a ton of bums. And he did. But then he got knocked out by Tim Johnson. Saeed Soma? How do you say that? But I remember not being impressed by that too much. Oh, and then Magomed Magomedov is on this card too, which is insane because he's been the Russian MMA darling for quite a while. Like, back when ACA was called ACB, and back in M1 too, he had some really good fights. I was about to say he's the sole loss on Petr Yan's record, but he was the sole loss until Petr Yan didn't know the fucking rules. Every post about Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling is just full of these guys trying to justify not knowing the rules. It's so good. They're like, yeah, well, it should have been scored a no contest. You're like, no, the guy tried to knock him out with a knee on the ground illegally, and he did. So that's a DQ. But Magomedov had those 2 fights with Petr Yan, won the first, lost the second. Lots of people thought that one of those decisions was wrong. I can't remember which one it was. Probably the first. But undefeated since then as well. The only downside is that fight with Petr Yan was in 2017. He's only fought 4 times since then. So an enormously talented guy fighting CJ Hamilton, who is not really someone that I've heard of much at all. Let's see. Split decision win in his last one on Combate. Lost by arm triangle on LFA. Yeah, lost to Casey Kenny, Jordan Espinosa, and Jimmy Flick. Well, Casey Kenny and Jordan Espinosa we know are good guys. So really this looks like a sort of like a let's get this ball rolling with Magomedov. I wish I could bet on this. This would have improved my parlay odds, to be honest. But that's about it. Like, this is a okay event. The next one looks okay too. It will probably be ruined by their absolute shit tier booth. Honestly, watching that Emmanuel Sanchez Pitbull fight, I remembered how much it takes out of me. It's fucking hard to watch a fight when 2 people are talking about anything but the fucking fight. But anyway, if you want to watch that, you should. If you don't want to watch it, probably not a big deal. I might cover it on Monday. I mean, really at a loose end here now. Luckily, next week we've got a Bellator and one, which will be okay, you know. Lyoto Machida headlining a card at light heavyweight in 2021. All right. Fucking hell. Oh, I love that clip of Alan Moore being like, I don't want to slag off an old man. But that is how I feel whenever I have to talk about like Lyoto Machida headlining an event in 2021. Let's do a question and pad out some time and then we'll get out of here for today. Dear Jack, I'm a long technical boxer, but when I Thai spar, I find myself unable to jab efficiently without being able to sit on my lead orthodox leg, which makes it impossible to stop my opponent from charging in with multiple looping unorthodox shots. Is there a fighter I can emulate or trick, to solve to solve this issue? The best success I've had is to go southpaw and look for big lefts. Thanks for the read. Looking for all the advice I can get before my pro MMA debut. Ooh, okay. Well, that from Danny. Well, that affects what I was going to say. I was going to say if you're kickboxing sparring, use the lead leg, teep. That's the solution. I was watching. What was I watching? Diesel Noy versus Samart. And Samart, considered one of the... both of these guys are considered 2 of the greatest Muay Thai fighters of all time. But Samart's phenomenal in that he was this amazing technical kickboxer. And then he went to boxing and won a world title there too. Like, he was just incredible all round. Especially because as a Nak Muay, he used his teep so much and was considered like a kicker. So he was winning world titles in boxing with like his backup game. Meanwhile, Diesel Noy, like 9 feet tall, really tall for his weight class, and really skinny, but had amazing knees. And I was really surprised in that fight how well Diesel Noy was using his jab while trying to like cut the ring and pressure Samart. And a lot of it was by picking up his lead leg to teep, and sometimes he'd teep, other times he'd just pick up his lead leg and come down behind it with the jab, and then follow with like a good inside low kick or something like that. But picking up the lead leg and then setting it down in range is so useful. Like, even if you're never going to teep, or neb or push kick or foot jab or whatever you want to call it, even if you're never going to front kick, picking up that knee is incredibly useful for taking you over the counter low kick. I always say Diego Ferreira does this loads, like against Mehmet Tysonov, just picking up the lead leg and stepping in, or against Anthony Pettis. But the other thing that's got me scratching my noodle here, noodle being head, is that you say the opponent can just run in on you, throwing multiple looping unorthodox shots. That sounds like one person's pissing you off. But I think the thing is, like, if you're used to boxing and your jab's good enough to just stop the opponent coming in, you forget that isn't always... if you're boxing against people who box, they're not going to bum rush you. In kickboxing and MMA, guys will bum rush you because even if... And by bum rush, I mean even good technical fighters will try and run in on you because... if they're having trouble with kicks, if they're getting pinned down at range, they know that closing in is their best option. And there's a lot more closing very quickly in kickboxing and MMA than there is in boxing. Boxing tend to like wait for it, jab, dip, try and get in after your jab, or try and get in on the opponent's return. There's a lot more methodical, whereas in kickboxing there is a lot more, even at the highest levels. Like, he's kicked, right, I'm running back at him. It's like we're always talking about that, like, get it back mentality. But I think the thing that, like, if you've been working with good boxers for a while, you know, you're not going to have to deal with people charging you, and you might have forgotten that, like, the best answer to that is to step off. You know, if it's all possible, for the first, like, couple of charges, just step off, because then people stop doing it. Because, you know, if they think they're going to run at you and you're going to move, they're not just going to keep doing that because they'll tire themselves out. And if they do, you know, let them tire themselves out. But circling off is so valuable. Like, the one that, you know, I remember when I wrote that Killing the Queen Ronda Rousey, and there was an amazing post. I think it was it Sherdog? It was one of the forums. Someone was just like, here's why Jack Slack's new article is crap. You know, and it's just, you know, I was talking about how important circling out against Rousey is, and not even doing anything for the first, like, round, if possible. Just circle. And the guy was like, just circle? Well, then she'll just run faster to catch up with you. It's just, you know, and then as it turned out, like, Holly Holm, you know, you watch the first minutes of that fight, maybe she lands a couple of good shots, but most of that first round is, like, circling and getting away. And Ronda, she's given the choice between slow the fuck down and try and do it methodically, which then plays into the kickboxing match, or keep charging and tire yourself out and then get lanced up with counter left hands if you keep doing it. And she did, in fact, opt to just tire herself out by running at her. But even then, like, the second round, you saw she was starting to go, okay, right, I might try and jab my way in. So you got to make people want to engage in that technical bout rather than just charging in on you. So move offline, tie them up, just make it so that when they run in, they're not given, like, a covering opponent just standing there like they want. Or just an idea, you know. If you're training for MMA, like, maybe less focus on the teep, but definitely more focus on the movement. You need to be able to circle out well if you're going to be fighting in MMA, because there are going to be guys who just want to dive for your legs. Cheers, Danny. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I did say it'd be a short one. However, if you're still in the mood for more Slack and you want some quality Slacky content, I did just release an article on Sean O'Malley's cross steps, which I've been talking about for a while on the podcast, like mentioning in passing, but that Almeida fight was perfect because it all just came together, and the knockout was a result directly of the front kick into cross step. And we often talk about, like, how crossing the legs is it's the golden rule of boxing is don't cross your feet. And golden rule of most athletic pursuits is don't cross your feet. It's always outside foot, inside foot. But there are things you can do by crossing your feet that are particularly interesting, and it becomes quite eye-catching. And the Sean O'Malley front kicks into cross steps is what we talk about in that article. But we also talk a bit about, like, Guillermo Rigondeaux does a lot of cross-stepping. My boy Jersey Joe Walcott snuck in, almost hijacked the article. Emmanuel Newton used to do the circling along the fence, cross-stepping, and then turn his back and hammer fist guys in the jaw. Spinning back fist, whatever you want to call it, as they moved in on him. It's a pretty good piece. And like all my articles, it has an audio track so you can follow along without having to read, because we've all got tired eyes now. So if you want to get in on that, support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to read what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, quietly restarting Bellator, having fired Mike Goldberg and Big John without anyone hearing about it. Bless.